Hi, and welcome to this week's Hopeful Conversations. I'm Vicky Montague, and today I have got John L. Mokadem with me. Now,
Hello, hi everybody.
hey, John is, I'm not going to give a huge long introduction because I want to give you lots of time to hear his story, but John has been a kind of inspiration for me, I guess, well, I think really since I came across the principles. I came across you quite early on, and just was really inspired by your story and just intrigued, I guess. And then I had the pleasure of being trained by you with Nicola Bird to become a little peace of mind practitioner, which was just really wonderful
It
experience
feels
for
like
me.
ages ago, doesn't it? I can't, it's what, 3 years or something, is it that?
It's
Gosh,
not even that long. It's what
is
we
it not?
finished. No, we finished just before the pandemic.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Gosh,
so
that's how time distorted I am
it,
at the minute with all this. So,
it's funny, isn't it? Yeah. So it was the January was the sort of final part of the training, and then the
okay,
pandemic. We were then in lockdown in March, so we were. I just feel so grateful that we were able to get that in
get that in.
physically
Yeah,
rather than online. So yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? How
yeah, it
time
is
is.
crazy how time has, yeah, done what it's done.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. So John, I'd really love you to just kind of share your health story. Some people may have heard it before, but I just think it's such a hopeful story. And I know that you experienced COVID earlier this year as well. And if there's anything that you kind of want to share about that, I guess, because there's obviously a lot of fear around
Yeah.
it and what it means and long COVID and what that might mean. And, having had your experience of CFS, I'm kind of intrigued, I guess, to sort of hear how COVID was for you as well.
And how it's all linked together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see how it comes out today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really funny, just thinking about this because the health journey, the deterioration of my health actually began in 2007, which actually feels like what is that, 14 years
Yeah.
now. And the kind of big insight I had where things really started to change was in 2014. So that was sort of 7 years. It was a 7-year journey. So I've had sort of 7 years since then. It's quite interesting just to reflect on that. But what happened to me? Well, I was kind of what I just thought was a regular guy living his life, and I'd always been a sort of pusher, striver kind of person. Always liked to kind of do well. Really, I really revered my head, my
Oh yeah.
thinking mind. I kind of come from a sort of quite intellectual academic background, and so for me, my logical, rational mind was the real power in my life, or so I thought. And I spent a lot of time up there, and it seemed like my mind was, or my head or my thinking were the things that really controlled and drove my achievements and my creation of my goals and all of that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
then in 2007, I got what I thought was just a regular kind of bug. Um, and it just kind of didn't go away. And then I had all sorts of treatments at the time. I remember taking different antibiotics and all sorts of stuff, and it just wasn't getting better. And a whole host of kind of things happened at that point. It's really interesting just seeing that this isn't as fresh for me, which tells me how far I've moved on
Mm.
from all of this.
Yeah.
It's not something I really think about that much, but I remember, I had several kind of things happen to me where I just felt really ill, like I had a terrible flu with incredible headaches and all sorts of stuff. And I went through the medical system and they kept saying, yes, just take this and it'll be fine. And it really wasn't fine.
No.
Um, and I actually appeared to get worse. And I remember there was a sort of real turning point where one day our kittens had woken us up in the middle of the night. and I sort of chased him downstairs again. And then I came back upstairs and went to the bathroom. And then the next thing I know, I collapsed through a shower door. And I found my pregnant wife looking rather, disturbed and upset at the fact that I was lying on the floor and had been unconscious for a while.
Wow.
So I'd sort of collapsed and fainted. And then I got taken to hospital, and they threw the book at me, and they started trying to work out what had happened and why I was in this state. And of course, I had this sense of being somebody that was very fit and healthy prior to all of this. So my sense of identity had really been assaulted at this point. It was like, what is this? I'm collapsing. I'm really sick. I'm not getting better. And there was this sort of anxiety that was starting to kick off.
Yeah.
And it was fueled by the fact that, I was in the hospital and they were looking for all sorts of scary illnesses, to see what had caused me to be in this state. And of course, the more I heard about these scary illnesses and the more tests they did, the more anxious I became about the state that I was in.
Yeah.
And this sort of continued for a while, this process of trying to find what was wrong with me, and it didn't really go anywhere. And, despite the number of medical tests that I had, they kept kind of turning up nothing. And it got me to the point of going, well, they're not finding anything, but I feel terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm such a shadow of who I knew myself to be. And so at this point, my revered thinking mind kind of kicked in and said, well, okay, if you guys don't know what's wrong with me, I'll figure out what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so I went down this whole path of trying to figure it out for myself and did all kinds of different treatments. I tried Chinese herbs and acupuncture and did yoga and meditation and went on weird detox diets. I had mercury fillings removed from my mouth and all sorts of stuff as an attempt to try and get well.
Yeah.
And it didn't really work. And then on top of all this, I had, when I'd gotten sick, as I said, my wife was pregnant. So there was this sort of double stream of John's getting sick and we don't know what's wrong with him, and we're having a child, and what on earth are we going to do?
Yeah.
And that was sort of operating together as quite a lot of stress. It felt like there was a real urgency to get well.
Yeah.
And whilst I was sick, I spent 3 months in hospital at one point with them trying to get me out of this kind of fatigue state that I was getting into. And at its worst, I was basically unable to go outside of my hospital room. I was that dilapidated and exhausted. So there was so much going on. There was kind of the assault on my sense of who I was and being this high achieving fit person, and now not finding myself like that. There was this pressure I felt to be a father, and the fact that we had a baby on the way. And then of course there was immense strain on my relationship with my wife at the time, because just everything was kind of crumbling. So what happened was kind of 7 years of trying to get myself back to what I was, and constantly troubleshooting and trying all sorts of different things. And I got to a level of function. I say a level of function. It was not great. I would constantly find myself lacking in energy. I would find myself very, I couldn't be in the sun very often. That was one of the things that really scared me, was the fact that I had this kind of heat intolerance.
Right.
So I couldn't be in the sun for more than a few minutes without feeling very sick, getting headaches and dizzy. And it got to the point where if I was out and about, luckily I live in England, so it's not that sunny a lot of the time. But when it was, I would kind of shadow walk. So I'd learned this process of kind of walking in the shadows of buildings so that I wouldn't have to experience being in direct sunlight and heat.
Wow.
I had to take cold showers because my body was so reactive to the heat.
Wow.
It was really full on for 7 years, and I really, really struggled with it.
Yeah.
And then, I can make the story go on for long. I'm aware of the sort of time. So the sort of, after I tried all this stuff, I kind of got to a point of sort of maybe accepting maybe this was my lot, and I'd been given this diagnosis. I guess it's worth saying this. I'd been told I had chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah.
And from what I understood about chronic fatigue syndrome, nobody really kind of got it. They were looking for organic causes for it. You might get better or you might not. You might have a level of function or you might be bedbound for the rest of your life. Like, nobody really knew much about it from what I could tell. So all of this, as you can imagine, ticking around in my head going, wait, I used to be this really fit, high performing thing. That was my identity.
Yeah.
And now I might not be forever. So it fed the struggle against, it fed the kind of desperation to get out of it. And the thing started to change sort of unexpectedly. I remember I was doing a coaching apprenticeship with Michael Neal. And again, I can't believe this is like 7 years ago now. And I was talking to him about, I'd gone to see him for lunch one day when he was in London. It had been a sunny day, and I'd had to do my shadow walk thing to go and see him to lunch. And I remember sort of sitting there just having a conversation with him and talking to him about what I was going through medically and my symptoms and all that sort of stuff. And I said to him, have you ever come across anybody that had this problem with sort of sunlight and heat intolerance? And he said, well, his first answer to me was, maybe you're a vampire, John. I was like, okay, thanks for that. I don't think I am, but thanks for that. And then he said something else to me. Now, bear in mind, I know you said some of your listeners may or may not know about the principles, but I was learning about the principles with Michael at the time. And he sort of said something to me, and it was more of a throwaway comment at the time, but he said to me, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. Now, I remember when he said that to me, and if you've got any chronic fatigue people listening to this, that might really rile them. It really riled me. And I actually remember sort of basically swearing at him and telling him where to go. It's like, because it seemed to me that what was being said to me was, on some level, I must be making up this experience. Like it was sort of in my head. And I'd had people who'd said that to me in the past. And now I look back on it, although now I see that there is something to that conversation, the way people were delivering that to me was such that it was dismissive. It was unkind. It was uncompassionate. I don't think Michael meant it that way at all. But that was my reaction. It was off the back of hearing so many people say it to me in an unkind or a dismissive way. So when he first said that to me, I was just like, yeah, he doesn't know what he's all about. Whatever. And so what then sort of followed was, I remember leaving that day, and then I had you might think this is funny given what I was dealing with at the time, but we had a summer holiday booked to Turkey.
Oh, goodness me.
A hot country.
Yes.
And, I'd resigned myself to the fact that I was probably going to be sitting in a villa a lot with air conditioning on. And, watching from a patio and hanging out with the kids from there. And then maybe I might come out at night like a vampire and, we'd go for a meal and that sort of thing, but I wouldn't be doing much during the day. Anyway, it occurred to me, I've got this summer holiday, and somebody had mentioned to me about a functional medicine doctor that they knew. And I'd not gone to see him. And I thought, you know what? I've heard good things. I don't know, maybe one last try. Let me go see somebody about it. So I go and see this doctor. And he really runs a battery of tests, a whole load of tests that I'd not had done before. And there were two results that came back from that testing that were interesting. The first one was my nutritional profile was all green, like there was basically nothing I was lacking, which in a way was not surprising to me, because my type A striver achiever mentality had a spreadsheet which, you know, used to manage my nutritional stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I took lots of stuff, and you know, it was kind of like, oh yeah, look, I've got a green profile. I did it. Look, I achieved that. But I was still sick.
Yeah.
And the other thing that came back was I had this adrenal profile that was done. And the adrenal profile showed that my cortisol levels were kind of through the roof. And my other hormones were really edging towards much, much lower than they should have been. And I just sort of asked the doctor, I said, well, what does this mean? And he said, well, it seems like you're under a lot of stress. That's why your cortisol levels are high. And he said, if you're under sustained stress for a long period of time, you can start to see a profile like this, because your body prioritizes the building blocks for your hormones towards cortisol, and then there aren't so much left for the other hormones, so they start to drop down and your cortisol levels go high. And then at some point, you probably won't have enough building blocks to make the cortisol, so everything kind of drops to the floor. So I was in this kind of stage of kind of burnout. And so I started to get puzzled about, you know, what is it that is causing the stress on my body? Because it didn't seem like I lived a very stressful life. You know, we got a lot of our kind of issues together at this point, sort of 7 years on from the initial thing. And so I was kind of looking at it going, well, what am I sort of stressed about? And he said something to me that day. I can't quite remember how we got here, but he said something to me that day, which was, do you know how much energy it takes for you to be this tired? And that really hit me, because initially it didn't make sense. I was like, wait, so you're telling me I have energy and I somehow use that to create tiredness? How does that work? Well, it was then that the comment that Michael said to me came back to me. And he said, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. And then I realized, oh, yeah, I don't inherently have a stressful life, but I really live as if I do, because I'm in my head 24 hours a day, not only doing my, you know, what's your 10-year plan for life thing, but it was also now managing my illness as a full-time job. It was like monitoring for my symptoms, monitoring for if I was improving, trying to work out what I was going to do if I suddenly had some kind of relapse, and how I would manage the outcomes of my life if those things happen. Managing which treatments I was going to do, managing my spreadsheet full of nutrients and supplementation. Like, I really was in my head all of the time. And it suddenly occurred to me, oh, maybe this is what is driving this. And actually, this is the thing that has always been there for a very long time. I have prided myself on being somebody that controlled life in my thinking mind, that could fight to get somewhere through my resistance and my vigilance and my overthinking. And it was at that point that I started to see, maybe this is in fact the source of what is making me sick. And if people are wondering, well, how does that make you sick? Well, it's really simple. We live in a state where our nervous system has two kind of modes, as I understand it. There's rest and digest, and there's fight or flight. I was in fight or flight all the time, because I was constantly trying to get somewhere, and I was constantly trying to work out how to get there. So that tells my nervous system, I am not where I should be. It's not okay to rest and digest. We have to get somewhere. Well, that was the point when I started to see, oh, this is the mechanism that undermines health. If we are living in vigilance, we're living in fight or flight. When we're in fight or flight, the body thinks it needs to get away from a tiger. So it deprioritizes immune system, detoxification, repair work, you know, normal hormone and neurotransmitter expression. Doesn't want to do that, because it's going, why would I bother with that if I'm about to be eaten by a tiger? I need to get the heck out of here, and then I'll manage the damage later on. But if you never come out of that vigilance, it never gets to the point where it gets to heal that. And so you become like a car whose service light has gone off at 10,000 miles, and yet you continue to drive 50 or 60,000 miles afterwards. You start getting rattles, you start getting smoke out the exhaust, and things start to break.
Yeah.
That's what was going on with me. So the moment I really started to get the mechanism behind what was causing my symptoms, a few things happened. The first thing was the idea that there was some scary thing operating inside of me that nobody had been able to diagnose or find or isolate. It started to fall apart because I was like, my body's just ragged, solid, ragged. It's been run ragged from me using my head for something that it is not meant to do.
Yeah.
And so this fear that something had been missed started to collapse. And then what happened was I started to really see more about, this part of us that is running life that is disconnected from our thinking. So, those who know something about the principles will have heard of this idea of mind, this kind of deeper intelligence. Well, I was thinking that my thinking was the deeper intelligence, but really what was starting to come alive for me in this journey was the recognition that really there's so many hundreds of processes that go on in my body that probably for most of my life I'm never even aware of, never think about, never do anything with, and yet something operates them. What if my attempt to operate my life and control my body in my thinking, what if that same intelligence could do a much better job than John in his thinking mind? And so that's what started to happen for me. I started to become less afraid of how I was feeling, less afraid of what it all meant, and to remember that actually there was something deeper than John's thinking. And how that translated was I started to kind of just live my life unafraid and with a lot less thinking about my illness.
Right.
And what I found was it was relatively quick. It was about 6-7 weeks after that initial insight that things really started to change in a massive way. And I did actually end up on this holiday in Turkey. And you can't see it now because the blog has now been removed from my old website. But there was a blog that I wrote with a rather unflattering picture of me standing with my shirt off in the sun.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
The first time, with a slightly pot belly, as I recall as well. But it was like, I don't care. I'm standing in the sun for the first time, and it was such a massive change.
Wow.
And after that happened, it really deepened my understanding of the principles, because I'd seen this kind of massive change in my health, and something which I thought was going to be with me for the rest of my life kind of unravel in such quick time that I started to get really puzzled about, well, where else in life does mind really run this?
Yeah.
And what if it's okay for me to just rest in the quiet of who I am and not be thinking about work, parenting, finances, what I'm going to be doing in 10 years, what's going on with my health? What if I didn't need to think about these things, and that same intelligence would not only drive my knowing about what to do about those things, but it would also be the thing that is managing my health and everything else in my life. So that was kind of what started to unfold from that point. And I wouldn't say I'm complete in that sense. I would say I'm very much like any other human being. I'm a work in progress, and I continue to explore seeing more of that in my day-to-day life. But what unfolded from there, and I can keep going. I don't know how long you want to keep going.
No, carry on. It's fascinating.
Okay. So after that point, I remember I started to improve dramatically, and I was like, I actually began to go, well, I don't think I had chronic fatigue then, because who gets better from chronic fatigue in 6 or 7 weeks? I've never heard any stories like that. So I was like, okay, I'm really pleased that I'm well. And I guess they had the diagnosis wrong all those years ago. Oh, well, I'm getting on with my life. And so it didn't occur to me to work with people with chronic fatigue or health conditions, because I just thought I'd been lucky in getting better and that I had been misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Well, apparently life knew different. And it started to throw people in my way, even though I'm kind of focused on, well, I'm getting back to work and I'm doing corporate work and all this sort of stuff. It's like life was going, well, I'm just going to start putting people in front of you, you know, that we think you can, that life thinks it can, you know, you can help. So I remember when we moved house, I found out from the guy that owned this house that I'm in now, that his granddaughter had been really ill with chronic fatigue. And,
Wow.
you know, she was so unwell that she was about to consider going to like a special school for sick kids. And you know, her attendance rate at school had dropped to like 20%, and you know, it was a really serious kind of situation. And when I was told the story, there was something that twigged past my thinking about whether I should work with people, and just twigged at my heartstrings. And I heard the story and I was like, you know what, let me have a chat with her. Let me see if I can help in some way. And in my mind, I was thinking, I don't know that there's much I'm going to be able to do, but you know, at the very least, I can offer an understanding ear and drink a cup of tea with her and try and make her feel a bit better. And at best, maybe she'll feel a bit healthier. Let's see. Well, I was shocked because I then started chatting to this kid, and I just heard all of the sort of same things that I had gone through. I saw, you know, the attachment to her mind as the thing that was driving life, her striving for results and achievement and getting somewhere. The, you know, the misunderstanding about the nature of the symptoms and what they meant. You know, all of this sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, this is kind of familiar. You know, maybe there is some link between, you know, what others are going through with this and what I went through. So I just spent time sharing my story with her. And I was shocked as I started to see this was really impacting her, and she was starting to change and she was starting to get better. And it got to the point where, you know, she was telling me about her part-time job and the parties that she'd been to and all of this sort of stuff. And I was like, wait, is this the same kid?
Wow.
Couldn't believe it. But my mind was still not convinced, believe it or not, Vicky. And I was just like, oh, okay, I'm really pleased she's well. And that's it. I'm not.
It was an accident.
It was an accident. Yeah. My mind wrote it off, and it was like, okay. Well, I then found myself doing another training a couple of years later, and I had to do a community project. And I was like, I wonder if there's something else to this. And so I worked with another two people. One lady had been ill for 23 years with chronic fatigue. And I started to see again the same misunderstandings. And she had done more stuff than anybody I'd ever talked to try and get better as well. Like I'd heard, she was telling me about therapies I'd never heard of.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, I thought I had done a lot, but you've really gone to town with this and nothing's worked. And I just saw the same things going on again, you know, this kind of innocent misunderstanding about how living in this vigilance could really affect our body's physiology and chemistry, and how when we don't recognize that deeper part of us that is before our thinking mind, that knowing that comes through us, you know, we can really live in a lot of vigilant thinking, and it perpetuates this cycle over and over and over again. Well, you know, I started sharing again with this lady, and you know, within a month, she comes back to me. She said, you know what, I think I'm getting to the point where I'm actually better. I'm not sure I've got this anymore. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, you've been ill for 23 years? Now, I think it's worth saying she was not, you know, in the sort of worst sort of situation, as in bedbound, isolated, not doing anything. Like she was functional to a degree. But it was profound for me to be able to see, oh gosh, within a month, just starting to understand what's going on and see through some of the things I'm pointing you towards is really apparently making a difference. So I worked with her, and then I obviously had another person that I worked with, and she had been diagnosed with an underactive thyroid. And I didn't know anything about thyroid that much. All I knew was what I'd learned from my own journey, which was that, you know, when we live in high stress and high vigilance, our other hormones can drop to the floor. So I kind of was just sharing what I'd seen about that and addressing the vigilance piece with her. Well, she started to improve. And then at some point, she said to me, I've run out of thyroid medication and I haven't gone back to get any more. And I said, well, don't you think you should do that? You know, I'm not a doctor. I'm not telling you not to take your thyroid medication. So maybe you should go and renew that. And she said, I just don't think I need to. And it turned out that her thyroid had started to improve because her vigilance levels had come down. I now know a little bit more about that, and from what I've understood with my work with Karen, who I did the research with, which I'm happy to talk about, you know, it's actually quite common that, you know, we would intervene at the level of where the apparent deficiency is. So we'd see the thyroid is low and go, something wrong with the thyroid, better give some thyroid meds. But actually, a lot of the time, that is being caused by the fact that we've got such a high demand for the building blocks to build cortisol and adrenaline, because we're living in this kind of vigilant state. And it's just manifesting as a thyroid that is running low. I actually came to see it for myself as like my body's reminder that I needed to just shut up from being in my thinking and just let the body do what it needed to do to sort itself out. It was like trying to just put me to bed so that it could repair the damage of me being in my head so much. So you know, it was fascinating to see that, and then we ended up, you know, having the idea of doing research around it. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, Vicky, I secretly did not want the research to work. Really didn't. I did it because I in my mind I just did not want to go down a route of helping people with health concerns, because frankly I felt like a bit of an imposter. You know, I'm not a doctor. You know, I'm just some guy who was sick, who happened to get well, but I don't claim to be a doctor in any sense of the word. But this idea to do research around this came up for me, and I followed it, but I was secretly hoping it wasn't going to work for that reason. So I could finally lay to rest this thing and go, I never have to deal with this again. And, you know, I can walk away from it. That isn't what happened. You know, we had 23 people who came on this research study, and we watched as just the sharing of this understanding really made a material impact on people. And you know, one of my favorite stories was a guy who was in a wheelchair, and he was not paralyzed, but he was exhausted. It was because of his chronic fatigue, and he used to navigate around in this electric wheelchair. And as he started to get sight of what was going on with him, and also I think it's important to say this, he started to recalibrate what it is to recover from this. You know, I think a lot of people with chronic fatigue, we innocently think that getting better from chronic fatigue is elimination of all symptoms, and then we live our life. But the problem is we then live in a vigilance for our symptoms all the time, which creates more of them. So part of our job on that study was to help people recalibrate, well, what does it really look like to get better from this? And as he started to see something about what that was like, he started to be able to function more with his symptoms to begin with, and less afraid of them. And as he did, instead of crashing, which often happens with people, that didn't happen. That didn't happen for a lot of the people on the course, because they were starting to see, oh, the vigilance for how I'm doing, the monitoring for my symptoms, and my misunderstanding that the symptoms are somehow bad, that is actually causing me to create more of them and crash. Now, I just want to say it to anybody listening to this. This does not mean you should just ignore your symptoms. So if you have any symptoms you're worried about, you go and get them checked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? But in this context, it was important to help people recalibrate what these symptoms really meant and what was normal for somebody recovering from this. And I remember his story was one of my favorites because it got to a point where he just came out of the wheelchair and he got an allotment, and he actually shared a photo of him beginning to dig and do stuff in his garden. And then later on, this was after the study, you know, he got rid of his wheelchair and bought a bike.
Oh my word.
It was just like we were just seeing things that were just blowing us away.
Yeah.
And you know, it really made me see, gosh, there is such a component to this that is unaddressed. Now, I'm not one of these people who say, don't take medications, don't take supplements. No. What I came to see about this is that this misunderstanding about the connection between our mind and body and how much we have to live in our mind to navigate life, it is fundamental in people's healing journey. If it is not addressed, it is like constantly under the surface, this misunderstanding, eroding our body from being able to find its health.
Yeah.
Now, as it happened with a lot of the people that we were working with on that study, it seemed like most of what was going on with them was just this misunderstanding. And as it was addressed, they were able to start improving without much other intervention.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot with the clients that I work with. But that is not to say that, you know, I think that all of this chronic fatigue stuff, fibro, whatever, it's all in the head or it's all made up. All I'm saying is it's worth looking at for people. Yeah. And what I find is that for most of the people I've worked with, certainly so far, the addressing of this has usually been more than enough to help them start to improve and get their life back on track. I've talked for a lot there, Vicky. I don't know if you want me to keep going or where you want me to go with it, really.
No, I mean, it's just such an incredible story. And I guess the thing that kind of comes out at me and that I know that a lot of people will struggle with to an extent if they haven't come across the three principles is this concept of mind, because I was exactly like you and completely revered my thinking and intellect and controlled everything. And, you know, what you described was absolutely me, along with
many of us.
Yeah, exactly. And the more I look at physical symptoms, the more I see how much is driven through this overactive thinking that triggers, as you say, the whole fight or flight system.
Yeah.
Me too. And that's
so innocent as well.
Yeah. But I think, you know, what you talked about mind and about there being something else that can run the show for you, as it were. I don't know whether you can just elaborate more on that, because I think that's the key. And many people find that really hard to comprehend.
Yeah, you know, there's lots of ways of sort of relating to this, but you can start to get puzzled about what's going on in your body. Right? I remember one of the things so I have a colleague I work with called Karen, and she's got more of a medical training than me. She was a trauma nurse, and I remember one of the things she shared on the study, excuse me, was this picture of the biochemical pathways in the body. And you look at this picture and it's like this spidery mess of processes and chemical reactions and all sorts of stuff that is going on in our body in real time in any moment. And you look at that and you go, my God, that's a lot. And I'm not thinking about that. And I don't even know about half of that stuff. And yet, apparently it's happening in all of us. How is that happening? It's clearly not happening in my thinking. So something else must be doing all of that. So it's firstly about observing that there are things that are going on that we are not thinking about, and yet apparently they work really well. Apparently they're functioning all of the time despite our thinking. Now, here's another way of me talking about this. So some of the Eastern traditions make a distinction between the illusory self and the true self. Now, you can think about our thinking mind and our sense of identity, who we think we are, our role in life, whatever. You can think about that as all of this noise that ticks around in our head that is making up judgments and conclusions and ideas about what we're going to do with our life, as being like this illusory self. It's very noisy, feels very real, feels very true. But when you really look at it, it doesn't actually have a lot of power. I would say it has none, but it might look like it has some sometimes. And it's really obvious to see when you look, because how many times has our mind made up a conclusion about what we're going to do about something, and then we show up to that situation and we don't do it? How many times have we made up a New Year's resolution? This year I'm going to lose 10 pounds in 3 months, and then a week in, apparently we're not doing that, and we're going, well, I really need to do that diet, and we're just not doing that diet, and we're finding ourselves effortlessly doing something else that's much more interesting to us, which our mind has had very little to do with. The study is a great example for me of that. I didn't think I was going to do that. Apparently I did. Didn't think I was going to work with people with chronic fatigue. Apparently I do. So, you know, it's about seeing, oh, this thing that we think is running the show, apparently it just sounds like it is. Apparently sometimes it appears to align with what we do, but more often than not, it really doesn't align with what we actually do. Just it thinks it does, but it doesn't. And so it must be that there is something else before this sense of identity that is actually moving our bones, that is actually moving us to do what we do. And that is what I'm pointing to, that there is a self before this idea of ourself, this thinking idea, that is actually driving us. And it's not something separate from us. It is us. It is who we are. It's just that a lot of the time we've been conditioned to live in the illusory sense of self that has been conditioned and programmed into us. So we've identified and gone, oh, well, that's who I am. No, we're something much quieter, much wiser, and, you know, much stiller than that noisy sense of self. And that's what I'm pointing towards. It's that there is a deeper part of us that most of us have become disconnected from realizing it's there. I'm not sure we're ever disconnected from it, but I think we forget that it's there. We forget that it knows. We forget that we get insights that come to us in the moment that drive our decisions, that drive our actions. I remember I had a client that I worked with a few years ago, again, who was really struggling with this concept and was spending a lot of time really going round and round talking about their symptoms, trying to figure them out. And I remember one day going, hey, I'm really curious, like, what are you afraid is going to happen if you just stop thinking about all of this? And she said to me, well, I'm worried I'm going to miss a symptom that is really important or that I should have gone to the doctor for. And then this really cool thing happened on the call. And she said, wait a minute, I've left a pan on the stove. So I said, go sort it out. So off she trots to her kitchen and she sorts out her pan and all of this sort of stuff. And then she comes back a few minutes later and I said, have you burned your dinner? And she said, no, thankfully. And I said, hey, were you thinking about that pan before you told me you needed to go sort it out? And she said, no. I said, well, what do you make of the fact that you've just stopped your house burning down and you saved your dinner? And she said, I guess I was nudged. I said, what makes you think that that same thing that just saved your dinner and your house from burning down wouldn't nudge you? if you needed to go to the doctor. And that's what I'm pointing towards. We are not aware that there is this deeper part of us that is all the time nudging us to do things, moving our bones. And half the time we sit there and our mind ignores it because it goes, yeah, it all has to make sense logically in my head. I have to be able to connect the dots before I'll let all that go. And of course, our mind is busy. Now, you know, that deeper part of us is busy because kind of moving us all the time. So sometimes to help clients connect to this, I get them to get puzzled about what do you notice has happened in, let's say, the course of a week that is surprising to you that you didn't think about and yet apparently got done. I remember one client who I asked to keep a list like this. She comes back to me when we next spoke and she said, I noticed I was cooking the dinner and I realized that I hadn't paid a bill. So I got my phone out and I paid this bill. And then there was another one that was to do with booking an appointment for her kid at the doctor. And she was just out for a walk and she'd realized, oh, I need to book this appointment. Picks up the phone, books the appointment. And it's like, it was fascinating because all the things that came back to me from her list, they were all things about looking after her well-being, her business, her kid, all of this stuff. And I was like, do you notice how you've done all of these really practical things that are about looking after your life? You didn't think about them, right? You don't think when you cross the road. You're present to the road. And in that moment, your knowingness about what to do kicks in. In fact, if you were thinking about how to cross the road or trying to strategize how you might do it from one occasion to the other, probably wouldn't end very well. So it's the recognition of something that is in fact incredibly ordinary, that is always at work. And it's just that we've gone to sleep to the fact that it's there. And we've innocently thought that this noisy bit of our head that it frankly does make a lot of noise, but doesn't really do very much. It's recognizing, oh, this doesn't really run the show. This isn't really driving what's going on. It just sounds like it is. And the more we see that part of us that is deeper, well, the kicker about it is it exists in the quiet. The peace, the well-being that we're all looking for in trying to control the world is actually a space that just exists before our thinking mind. Well, if we recognize that our thinking mind isn't actually the thing that drives us through life, we find ourselves settling into quiet, which is what we're all looking for. What a relief to see that not only is the quiet somewhere that is internal before our attempts to control the world, but actually it is that same space within us that our knowingness to navigate the challenges of the world really come from. You asked me to speak about COVID. It seems right that I would share a bit about that. Like, that knowledge of what I just shared was incredibly important when I was sick. You know, here we are dealing with something that there is a lot of fear around, that people have been frankly programmed to be terrified of. There are all sorts of scary stories knocking around about what's happening to people and what it can do to you. You know, I think it's worth being reflective of, I wonder how much damage that does to people. Just absolutely. In and of itself. Absolutely. That's not to say that I'm saying there's no bug or no virus. I had it. But it was really present for me when I got sick, that here I was experiencing symptoms of what was basically a flu-like illness. But on top of the regular flu-like symptoms, with the exception of the weird loss of taste thing, that was the weirdest thing I've ever had in my life. But with the exception of that, there was all of this segment of fear and thinking about what's going on and what does this mean and how do I deal with it? And all of that was kicking off. If I didn't have the knowledge, the understanding that my quieter self was the driver of my knowingness about what to do with my, you know, my predicament, this illness, I think I could have made myself very unwell.
Yeah.
Because even me, with my understanding, with the fact that I teach other people, well, I'm human.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've heard some of this fearful stuff. So it was really easy for my mind to start kicking off and being afraid of what was going on with me. And I actually had my own mentors to remind me at times, you know, of the fact that I didn't need to be thinking about what was going on, that if there was something I needed to do, that was going to come from the quiet rather than my fearful anxiety.
Yeah.
So that was incredibly helpful for me to know. It was also incredibly helpful for me to know what recovery was probably going to look like with this, because I remember there was a few times when, you know, I would get up to go and do something. There was one morning I remember I went to make breakfast for the kids, and I was cooking them something, I can't remember what it was. And I started feeling really panicky and exhausted and like I was going to pass out. And I remember all of my understanding from the chronic fatigue work started kicking in. I was like, okay, you're really deconditioned here, and your body's been fighting off an infection. So the normal checks and balances in the nervous system to stop you from getting kind of panicky and anxious, they're a bit worn down at the minute. So that explains why you're feeling kind of anxious and panicky and all that sort of stuff. I could well see, again, if I didn't have that understanding about why someone might start feeling anxious and panicky when they're just doing really normal stuff, I could have got really afraid. I could have started overthinking, well, what's wrong with me? This is really weird. That shouldn't be happening. And of course, the damage that gets caused by all of that fearful thinking. Now, I haven't, actually, that's not true now. I was about to say I haven't worked with anybody that has long COVID. I have worked with somebody who wasn't given the label of long COVID, but was really struggling.
Okay.
And what I've seen is that so far, just from this one person, so anybody listening, it's only one person I've talked to about this, but from my own experience and working with this person, I really saw just how much damage all that fearful overthinking about what was going on and the unknown element of COVID was causing them to overthink every little thing that was going on in their body, causing them to nursemaid themselves, understandably, you know, with kid gloves, their body, because they were afraid of what the symptoms meant. They were afraid of why they felt so bad when they did a little bit of exercise or when they did more and more. And of course, all of this programming and this understanding around it, or let's just say innocent misunderstanding of the virus, was just causing them to get into the same states that many of my chronic fatigue clients get in.
It's the supervigilance, isn't it? Again, it comes back to, and it's totally understandable. Like, you know, we're dealing with something that people don't really fully understand, and that we've heard lots of scary stories about. Of course, we're going to be a bit more fearful and vigilant about it. But again, it was sort of talking to her about the sort of whether the vigilance was useful. You see, I think a lot of us innocently believe that our vigilance is actually not a form of anxiety. It's a form of high performance. It's a form of being responsible. Yes, being responsible. That's a big one, isn't it?
You know, being on our game. And it's actually, when you look at it, it's just a form of anxiety. And we're reluctant to put that down until we can see that actually there's something before the thinking that does the work. Well, as I started to point this person to what had been going on and what I'd seen about it, it really resonated with her. She was like, yeah, I've really been vigilant and scared about all of this and thinking about the consequences and trying to work out what I do. And I said, just wonder how much of the damage that's currently going on with you is being caused by that versus something else operating in the background. Now, for anybody listening to this that's got long COVID or has been given that label, that this is just my experience of what I've seen so far, and it's a very, very small subset. But perhaps just get puzzled if you can see that going on within you, because if it is, you know, there may be something to see that's fact, very hopeful
Yeah.
for the outlook, in that if you can start to see something new about why you don't need to be so vigilant about this, you might actually be setting up your body to be in a much more healing space. So we did get to the COVID bit.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, I mean, you know, I'm going to wrap up, but just, I think it's just so fascinating. And I wonder, you know, how many people in your work with patients with chronic fatigue will start to be coming through with long COVID, because to me it looks like, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the symptoms and all the rest of it, but to me it looks so similar, and the mechanisms behind it, like you say, and that does give so much hope, because if you've got a diagnosis of long COVID at the moment, there is not a lot of hope there, is there? It's kind of a very fearful, scary story.
Yeah, and I think that it's worth talking about that, because, you know, I don't know, and I've never ever said this to anybody that comes to me, I don't know that everybody gets rid of their physical illnesses or diseases. Like, it seems to me that human beings do get sick.
Yeah.
And things don't always go the way that we would want them to. Would it be right to say, oh, well, if you just kind of understand what we're talking about here, you're going to magically get better? I don't think that's true.
No.
You know, I can certainly see exceptions that don't make sense to me in this context. Like, you know, a baby that has cancer, I'm not aware that it's living in vigilant overthinking.
Yeah.
It's just being a baby. So there's got to be other things that work here that we're not seeing. But the bit that's important to me is that if people can begin to see that their vigilance is not the thing that guides them through life, then at worst, they can be in more well-being, even if they still have a physical illness. Because so much of what creates the suffering and takes us away from our peace is the fact that we're thinking we've got to be vigilant and think about our illness and troubleshoot it and troubleshoot life as a way of navigating life. And if we don't do that, somehow nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, if you can see through that, then you can start to navigate your life, even with illness, with much more ease and grace and peace, because the only thing that's actually ever taking us away from that is how much we live in thought.
Yeah.
Well, if thought is not the driver of us and us knowing what to do, then it's okay to be at peace. And we'll still go to the doctor. We'll still take a medicine. We'll still pay our bill. We'll still do whatever it makes sense to us to do. We'll just do it with a lot more ease and grace. And that's really been, for me, the most important part of my principles journey. Is not that I live this perfect life where nothing bad happens to me, and, you know, I just have a lot more ease with the ups and downs of life, for finally realizing that the thing that I revered so much, my thinking mind, I've been able to fire it. Many jobs.
It's causing you a lot of problems.
Yes. It was like, oh, actually, it seemed like a bummer when I first realized it. And now it's like, no, that's really good news.
Yeah.
I don't have to live in my head to function. What peace is now available as a result of seeing that, if nothing else? So if somebody's looking for hope from this conversation, I can't guarantee that seeing this is going to make you better, but I can say to you, there's a huge amount of hope that if you even get a small glimpse into what we're talking about, you can have a much nicer experience of being alive, no matter what. Yeah. And that's the hope that's on the table, I think, for all of us, no matter what challenge we're facing.
A better life regardless of the circumstances, symptoms, whatever is showing up.
That's it. A freedom with our life, rather than a freedom as a result of a fight against something, or trying to get somewhere else, or whatever. It's like, oh, thank goodness, we're already the freedom we're looking for when we see through the illusion of thought.
That seems like a great place to wrap up, I think, and to just let people really sit with that.
I hope this was helpful and interesting to the people that, listen to it and stuff. And thanks for inviting me to come and share.
Oh, it's been amazing. Really beautiful, beautiful conversation, beautiful sharing. Thank you so much. Really
Not at
appreciate
all.
it.
My pleasure, Vicky. Thanks for having
Hope
me.
to catch you soon.
Yeah. Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Bye.
Take care.